I actually think that the notion of risk kind of connected all the presentations together, because we were talking about, first, Nick, you mentioned this issue of like Russia. Do they interfere? Do we know that? How can we really measure that? What is the risk, and what is the risk of us interfering in different ways? So I think it was very, very good at that. Also, there was this notion which kind of connected Tomáš and Martin's paper, which is that perhaps we are falling back on old ways of thinking because we just can't bear the risk. The ontological security of the old solutions of, well, we don't know what's going on, so we'll move some divisions to the east, is just very kind of tempting. Yeah, and the only other things I wanted to say is that I'm really happy that I feel so alive after your presentation. Because everybody was very disciplined on time. We still have at least 15 to 20 minutes for what will hopefully be a very lively discussion. So if there are any questions, please indicate them by raising your hand.
Thank you. Thank you for your speeches, very comprehensive and touching on a lot of issues. My name is Stefania, I'm a Romanian Erasmus student here in Prague at Charles University. And I have a question that ensues from the discussion on NATO as the embodiment of the transatlantic relationship between Europe and the US. Just yesterday at the Brussels summit, as you have mentioned, the members of the European Union pledged to adhere to the US-led anti-ISIS coalition. Taking into consideration that most of these countries were already individually committed to countering the malign actions of Daesh, is the yesterday's statement and subsequent action a political statement that tries to dispel Trump's infamous claim that NATO is obsolete, or it is just somehow a last-ditch attempt to genuinely commit to countering ISIS?
Thank you. Because it wasn't directed at any of the speakers, anyone who wants to address that, please feel free to do so. Because okay, so okay, there we go.
Thank you. I guess, well, my reading is like the European allies are trying to please Mr. Trump. It's obvious for many observers. However, the question is, what is the content, what's the essence of this commitment? Because, well, it's easy to say, but then the European members' military capabilities are, as we know, quite weak. So I can imagine the limited scale of air campaigns, probably also the cyber activities, and so on. But I wouldn't expect too much out of this official and public or PR statement. Of course, I don't want to underplay the seriousness of the NATO commitment, but well, we'll see.
Still, does anybody else want to join in that? Okay, so please, more questions.
Thank you. Well, I would like to touch on something Dr. Weiss has mentioned, but the question is actually for all of the speakers, because I think at least partly it's connected to the topics of at least 3 of the 4 presentations. You mentioned the case of Brexit, where the US, basically Obama himself, he didn't campaign, but he said openly that he would wish for the United Kingdom to stay within the EU, which didn't happen, obviously. Well, it's much harder to influence all the voters in a foreign country, isn't it? Like if you go back to the Suez Crisis, obviously it was much easier, comparatively easier for the US to influence the political elite when they said, like, yeah, it's going to cost you a run of the pound, so they back down. So the question would be for all of you: are we coming because of referenda, like the Dutch referendum tanked the EU-Ukraine treaty, and the referenda are becoming more and more often used, and maybe on more and more important topics than in the past. Are we coming to a point where public diplomacy or hybrid countering the hybrid threat more kind of social network propaganda or social network media offensive, we can say, is going to be more important than the traditional channels of diplomacy or the traditional ways to influence other countries' behavior. Because the voters are getting more and more powerful.
Okay, I'll start. I was mentioned by name. I think it's a good question, and I don't feel that old, but I'm probably old in that respect. And I would be very conservative on that. First of all, I think the rise in the use of referenda is over. And at least in Europe, as far as I am concerned, I think all the politicians will try to avoid it as much as possible because they have seen what that actually does. So that will be the first thing. The second thing, but that doesn't mean that public diplomacy or maybe media offensive is not important, obviously. Now, I think you can't juxtapose that. You can't juxtapose the traditional diplomacy, traditional influence, traditional policies, and media and public image. I don't believe public image or media offensive holds for a long time if you do not count in these exceptional moments of referenda, if it is not supported by real thing. So in that sense, I would be very conservative, and I do believe that you need to sell better what you are really doing, but I don't think that you can just sell nothing if you do nothing.
Thank you. Can I just jump in on this quickly?
Yeah.
As a British citizen, and you mentioned Brexit, I think the thing with democracy is that you have to listen to people who you think are wrong. And if there's more of them thinking that are wrong than there are thinking like you have to also accept their decisions. And as a British citizen who was definitely not in a Brexit camp, I have to accept democratically that my side lost, even though I think the other side was very wrong. But you raise an interesting point about the Obama intervention and other interventions who try to sort of support the Remain vote. And ultimately that didn't work because the people, if you give them a free choice, will sometimes make a choice that you don't agree with. And that's fine. But paradoxically, this is also the issue that regimes like the one in Russia, but also semi-autocratic or hybrid, they have a hard time understanding this, that actually sometimes people can actually do something regardless of foreign influence. So that's why you think that it's not possible that in 2011 and 12 people in Moscow can take to the streets without having had a signal from Hillary Clinton, when in fact they are perfectly capable in Russia or anywhere else to take to the streets and express positions without outside influence, and sometimes in the case of the Brexit campaign against attempts to influence. But it goes back to my point that there's many different ways of influencing. But I think your point about what does this mean are we then moving into a world where things like public diplomacy, cyber, digital realm measures become more important, counter-propaganda becomes more important? That, I think, is a very valid question. I'm not quite sure we know necessarily where we are with that debate. But you're quite right. I think now we are in a world where it is economically possible for most countries, even not very rich ones, to wage these kind of influence campaigns through these relatively cheap means of reaching populations or niches of populations in a sub-region or in a sub-ethnic group or sub-cultural group, and then through that influence politics. But it's not necessarily clear that the more state-based actors, starting with governments and all their sub-agencies, are really quite there in terms of understanding how to deal with this.
Thank you.
Okay, Martin?
Yeah, very briefly, I think that Obama's intervention was a terrible mistake because he did not only encourage them to vote for Remain, he connected it with a threat, and that was backfiring. He said, if you leave, you will come at the end of the queue in trade agreements, and that is factually untrue. It was totally contested in the United States, and it is, in my opinion, on the same level as releasing humiliating DNC material that the Russians and WikiLeaks published. So the Americans lose all credibility, the Democrats accusing Russia, and at the same time trying to threaten Britons into vote Remain. So I think that has undercut its credibility and was a terrible mistake. Farage says this put us over the top. Yeah. You cannot prove this, but it certainly helped the vote leave rather than the Remain camp.
Barack Obama also said that he would endorse Angela Merkel, so maybe he'll have more luck with that. Or is there more hope for Schulz because of that?
But it's not a yes and no vote, so...
Yeah. More question, please, the gentleman over there.
Thank you, gentlemen. The challenges issue is a huge issue, and I appreciate your attempting to compress it into so few minutes. Dr. Bouchet's presentation reminded me of another folder that perhaps we could open, and I would appreciate your thoughts on it. In looking at the Russian threat approach to Europe and other countries, I think we need to look at a concept that I've been calling basically access resource irredentia, or resource access irredentia. There is an enormous continuum that we see in the post-Soviet environment, which is represented in Section 2 of the Yeltsin Strategic Doctrine, which was immediately reclassified by Putin, and follow-on documents, that there is a need perceived beyond the political talk of protecting Russian speakers and other fallacious arguments to recover access to important assets that were lost in the fall of the Soviet Union. But this is a continuum, this is not a static issue. At the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Crimea, we were looking at 6 strategic factories that are fundamentally important to the rebuilding of the Russian military and certain core industries. Turbines for nuclear power plants, gears for the Russian Navy, the need for 30,000 helicopter engines from Ukraine to keep Russian helicopters in the air, and they can't seem to build replacements in Russia. There were issues at that time, but this is a continuum, and I appreciate your thoughts. 2 quick examples. One example is in the Russian rocket engine development program, we see tremendous failures, missions explode on or just off the bat. And in the medium lift capability, we see, for example, the Ukrainian factory, which makes the medium lift engines that are used to launch European satellites. This is a sector that the Russian industry has not been able to develop. So there is not just a historical resource access irredentia concept in the politics and the economics, the choices of technology for strategic defense in Russia and Putin's cabinet, but also there is a continuum and continuing need to have access. And I appreciate your thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you for the question. Because we're nearing an end, I will just ask before I yield the floor to you two to answer the question. Are there any other questions? We may collect 1 or 2 quick questions if there are some.